When my husband died, I kept quiet about one thing, one very big thing. Victor, in his stubborn, loving, old-school way, had signed the entire company over to me before he passed. Not 50%. Not shared ownership. All of it. 100%. But nobody knew that. So at the memorial service, when my son leaned in with that smug little half-grin, whispering, "Mom, I'm the boss now. Your new job starts tomorrow," cleaning my office bathroom, he genuinely had no idea what was waiting for him. The irony? That day, the 40th day after Victor died, was supposed to be one of quiet mourning. In our culture, people say that on the 40th day, the soul finally lets go of the world. Maybe that was true. Because as I sat curled into that deep armchair in our Hamptons parlor, surrounded by expensive perfume and lilies that were too sweet for my mood, it really did feel like my soul was the one drifting away, reaching for him. The house was packed tight. A low sea of murmurs, glass tapping lightly, shoes brushing polished floors. Everything was perfect. Classy. Exactly the kind of memorial you'd expect for Victor Holloway, founder of the Sterling Reserve, the man who built an empire out of refinement, taste, and old-world integrity. And yet, even though I was technically the center of attention, I didn't feel like a part of it. I felt like I was behind a pane of glass watching the whole thing play out like a silent film. Everyone approached me with the exact same lines, like they'd practiced them in the car before coming in. "Maya, stay strong. Victor was a great man. What a loss." I nodded. I smiled. I thanked them. I did what was expected.
But every set of eyes that landed on me saw the same thing, a decorative piece. A well-kept widow who'd spent 40 years arranging perfect dinners, matching table linens, and topping off champagne flutes. They saw his accessory, not his partner. Not the woman who had been the invisible bridge to half the artisans and family businesses that supplied us. They didn't realize that under the hum of polite conversation at those dinners, real deals, massive ones, were quietly sealed because of personal relationships I had cultivated for decades. I wasn't just refilling glasses. I was connecting with the chocolatiers' wives, asking the French curers about their vineyards, learning every little detail about their lives. Victor used to call it the social glue. He'd say, "Maya, I build the walls but you make it a home. Without you it's just a stone box." Now the house was a stone box. Cold. Hollow. And sitting in my lap was the only solid thing I still felt connected to. A slim leather folder the notary gave me. "This is Victor's final wish. For your eyes only," he'd said. I had skimmed it once. That was enough. The weight of what Victor left me was too heavy to reopen. The company, our company, wasn't in the official will. That part was hidden, tucked away in this private document that named me the sole owner of every single share. It was Victor's last act of trust. His last gift. And no one knew, not even Grant. As I sat there in the parlor, fingers brushing the cool leather, I heard two women whisper near the fireplace. "Poor Maya. How will she manage? Victor handled everything. She was really just the wife." I didn't get angry. Why would I? They were simply voicing the opinion everyone believed, including my own son. I found him across the room, Grant, standing in the middle of a huddle of executives, chest puffed, gestures wide, laughing in that high-pitched, overeager way he did when he was pretending to be powerful. He was wearing his father's confidence like an oversized suit that didn't fit him. He wasn't mourning. He was rehearsing his first day as king. He adjusted his tie the same way Victor used to, but without Victor's warmth. He patted our CFO, Arthur Vance, on the shoulder the way Victor did, but where Victor's touch was reassuring, Grant's was condescending. It was obvious. He thought the company was already his. Grant eventually noticed me watching. He wrapped up his little audience and marched over, Arthur trailing behind him like a loyal shadow. "Mom," he said, blocking the lamplight. His voice, usually so much like Victor's, had a metallic edge now. A hardness. A dryness I had never heard from my boy. "We need to talk." He didn't wait for my response. He just started walking, expecting me to follow. And I did like a ghost, drifting behind him toward the buffet table piled with the delicacies I had arranged personally. The caviar, the pâtés, the cheeses, everything that represented the heart of the Sterling Reserve. Grant plucked a canopy off a tray without even looking at it, and tossed it in his mouth like a gas station snack. Then, with zero hesitation, zero gentleness, zero awareness of who he was speaking to, he said, "So, starting tomorrow, I officially take over. Dad's office is mine. I'll need you to clear out his stuff. And your stuff." He paused to pick lint off his sleeve. "Actually, you'll need to move out of the estate altogether. I'm hosting corporate receptions here now. It won't be comfortable for you. You can move to the city penthouse. It's smaller, but it's enough for someone your age." But he didn't understand what Victor built wasn't a machine. It was a family. A worldwide family of artisans whose loyalty was worth more than any contract. Grant didn't understand a damn thing. And that was the moment I knew. This wouldn't be a fight for inheritance. This would be a fight for honor. Theirs. Victor's. Me. I leaned down, opened the bottom drawer of the desk, and pulled out my personal leather-bound notebook, the one containing the only relationships that mattered. Not suppliers. Friends. The first name under D, Charlotte Dubois Chocolatier Brussels. We'd known each other for 35 years. She was more sister than friend. Victor trusted her as much as he trusted himself. I took a deep breath and dialed the number. And that call, gentle, coded, honest, was the first thread I tugged in the web I had spent 40 years weaving. A web that was about to tighten. A web that would show my son exactly how wrong he was. Victor's study felt different that night. Not softer. Not sadder. More focused. Like the air itself was waiting for me to make a move. I sat at his desk, the leather cool under my elbows, the shadows thick around me. Outside, the house had gone silent. The guests were gone. The candles were dying. The grief that had been choking me for weeks wasn't choking anymore. It was sharpening. The folder with Victor's will lay beside me like a loaded gun. But I didn't reach for it. I reached for something far more powerful, my leather-bound notebook. The one Victor jokingly called my spiderweb. "My dear," he teased, tapping the cover. "You've woven threads across half the world. They don't cling to us because of contracts, they cling because of you." Well, tonight I was going to test the strength of those threads. I flipped to the D section. Charlotte Dubois. Brussels. A woman whose chocolate could make a grown man cry. And one of the very few people in the world I trusted without reservation. I dialed. It rang. Once. Twice. Then. "Hello." Her raspy, warm voice flowed through the line. "Charlotte." I whispered. "It's Maya." "My goodness, May," she breathed. "I was thinking about you all day. How are you, my sweet? How was the service?" Her voice wrapped around me like a wool blanket. For a moment, I almost crumbled. "It went as it should," I said carefully. "There were many people. Everyone remembered Victor." "Oh, May," she murmured. "He was a great man. A rare one. I lit a candle for him at the cathedral. I wish I could have been there with you." "Thank you," I whispered. I had to get to the point, but gently. Charlotte was sharp. One wrong word and she'd know everything. "I'm calling because we have some changes coming," I said. Quiet. Thoughtful. "I see," she replied, tone shifting from warmth to alertness. "Grant is taking the reins." "Exactly." Another pause. This one wasn't confusion, it was calculation. "Grant is a good boy," she said slowly. "But he's different. He's a child of this new century." "Yes," I said softly. "He is." "And you're calling too?" "To check on my friends," I said. "To thank them for the years of loyalty. Of friendship." Charlotte inhaled sharply. She heard the truth buried under my words. "I hear you, May," she whispered. "Call me if you need anything. Anytime." "Thank you, dear." We hung up. The first thread held fast. Stronger than steel. I flipped the page. Sri Lanka, Mr. Sundaram. Owner of the tea plantations that made the blend only found in our stores. A man whose father had worked with Victor's father. 3 generations bonded by leaves and respect. I dialed. "Madam Maya," he greeted me, warm and formal, his gentle accent smoothing every syllable. "My heart aches for your loss. Your husband was a beacon." We talked about his family, the monsoons, The new harvest. And then lightly I said, there will be changes. Silence. A long thoughtful silence. Then in a voice as steady as a prayer he said, Madam, our family has worked with yours for 2 generations. To us the sterling reserve is Mr. Victor. And you. Everything else is paper. A slow shiver ran through me. Thread number 2 unbreakable. I turned another page. France. Monsieur Lauren. The man who treated caviar like a religion. He answered on the second ring. Maya, he greeted, voice soft as silk. My heart is with you. We spoke briefly. I said what I had to say. He responded simply. Madam Holloway, reputation is not for sale. My reputation is tied to yours. I will not forget that. 3 calls. 3 threads. 3 anchors in a world that was about to spin off its axis. When I hung up after the 3rd conversation, something inside me shifted. The iceberg of grief cracked, but not into sorrow, into certainty. And now that loyalty was morphing into a net that would catch prey who believed they were hunters. I closed my notebook and let the silence of the study settle around me. No longer suffocating. No longer heavy. For the first time since Victor died, I felt something like strength. I had made my first move. Not as a grieving widow. Not as a mother who had been insulted. But as the rightful owner of the sterling reserve. Grant didn't know it yet, but the war for the soul of the company had already begun. I didn't sleep that night. Not even for a moment. I stayed in Victor's study until dawn crept across the bookshelves, lighting their spines with pale gold. The air felt new. Charged. Ready. I eventually went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed. Hands woven together, waiting. Waiting for the sound I knew better than my own heartbeat. The thud of Grant's heavy footsteps on the oak staircase. The slam of the front door. The roar of his engine. The first day of his triumph. The day he thought he would become king. I imagined it with painful clarity. He would arrive at the office at exactly 9 a.m. Not 8:55. Not 9:01. 9. He'd walk through the building, not inhaling the subtle blend of Sri Lankan tea, Belgian chocolate, and aged wood, the scent of legacy. No. He'd smell only money. Miss Davis, Victor's secretary since the beginning, would greet him with teary eyes. Mr. Grant Holloway, please accept my condolences. And Grant, God, I could see it, would give her that impatient little nod. Yeah, thanks, Miss Davis. Black coffee, no sugar. And send Vance in. He'd walk into Victor's study like a conqueror entering enemy territory. And the first thing he would do, remove Victor's portrait. The painting had hung above the desk for 10 years. It captured Victor perfectly, dignified, warm, clever, with a glint of mischief in his eyes. That portrait was the soul of the room. Grant would take it down without a second thought, lean it face first against the wall like a piece of trash, and replace it with his own glossy promotional photo. Thin frame, predatory smile, eyes looking at no one. A boy trying to look like a man. Enter Arthur Vance, our CFO. A man who bowed with his back but never with his mind. Mr. Holloway, he'd say, pretending reverence. Congratulations. You're in your rightful place. And Grant, oh Grant, he'd wave a hand and say, spare me, Arthur. Dad was a genius, but his methods were outdated. Friendships, sentimentality. It's not how business works today. Time to clean house. Time to optimize. He'd say it with his father's voice but none of his father's soul. He'd sit in Victor's chair, too big for him, but he wouldn't notice. He'd open spreadsheets and talk like he understood the company. All right, Grant would declare. First order of business, we cut costs. Our suppliers have been sitting on a gold mine for decades. Enough is enough. Arthur, ever the snake, would nod enthusiastically. But Grant, you know these old family businesses. They're sensitive. Victor maintained those relationships for years. And he bought that loyalty with our money, Grant would snap. Mom wasted time and resources with her cute phone calls and tea chats. But I'm not here to play hostess. I'm here to run a business. He'd laugh. A cold, humorless laugh. You and I both know the world runs on one thing, money. Not smiles. Arthur would blink once. Twice. Then smile. A slow, greedy smile. What do you propose? Simple. Grant would say, leaning back in Victor's chair like he owned it. Send a mass email to all key suppliers. Charlotte in Brussels, the tea guy in Sri Lanka, the French caviar family, everyone. He'd tap his laptop. Tell them, due to new leadership and updated company policy, we demand a 20% reduction in purchasing prices across all products. Effective immediately. Arthur would blink again. 20%? Grant, that's necessary. They'll complain, but they'll cave. No one wants to lose our business. Arthur would nod, seeing dollar signs. I'll draft it now. And Grant, believing he had just executed a brilliant strategy, would say, perfect. Send it today, before my mother calls to cry about the past. He was wrong. I wasn't crying. I was waiting for that exact moment. That fatal mistake. Because those emails, those cold, soulless, arrogant emails, would not launch an era of efficiency. They would launch their downfall. And I knew the replies would not come as negotiations. They would come as silence. Not defeat. Judgment. The quiet, icy judgment of people who had been betrayed. And when the first silence hit, miles away, tending Victor's orchids with soil under my nails, I felt something shift in the universe. The war had officially begun. The next morning felt unnaturally quiet. Not peaceful. Not calm. Just suspended. Like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I was in the conservatory, repotting Victor's orchids. He always said they were like me. Delicate on the outside, iron in the center. I didn't exactly feel like iron that morning. I felt hollowed out, scraped thin, trying desperately to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't go places that hurt. Then the phone rang. A sharp, unexpected buzz that cut straight into the quiet. I glanced at the caller ID. Brussels. Charlotte. My pulse tightened. It had begun. I wiped the soil from my hands, lifted the phone, and answered. Charlotte didn't greet me with warmth this time. There was no soft hello, no gentle sympathy. Her voice came through hard as tempered steel. May. I just saw it. That letter from your son. Her accents sharpened the words into blades. I stayed silent. Let her speak. It's not even a letter. It's an insult. A slap across the face. A demand? 20%? Effective immediately? After 35 years of partnership? Does he think my work, my family's legacy, is just cocoa and sugar you can bargain like cheap bulk? Every word shook with outrage. And she wasn't wrong. The email Grant sent was a spit in the face of everything the Sterling Reserve stood for. She continued, her voice rising like a storm. Your husband, God rest his soul, did business with respect. We worked on a handshake for 20 years before we signed the first contract. Because his word meant more than any legal document. And this boy, this child, he thinks he can talk to me like I'm some factory mill? I closed my eyes. The fury in her voice could have set the phone on fire. Then she exhaled sharply. I've already drafted the official termination. I'm pulling all shipments. My chocolate will never be sold in your stores again so long as this boy is in charge. I felt the words hit my chest, but I didn't flinch. I understood her anger. I respected it. But I also knew this wasn't the real reason she was calling. Her tone shifted, tight and unsettlingly quiet. But that's not why I called, May. What happened next? That's what you need to hear. My heartbeat slowed. Dangerously. What happened? Charlotte hesitated for a fraction of a second, the smallest crack in her self-control. I received a message from OmniCorp's legal department. The world around me went still. Tell me exactly what they said, I whispered. They requested confirmation of the terms of my exclusive contract with Sterling Reserve. They said they needed to ensure supplier agreements remained valid after the acquisition. The word acquisition punched a hole straight through my chest. Acquisition. She continued, each word a nail being driven in. They said they are in the final stages of negotiating a full buyout of your company. They wanted my contract details to finalize their due diligence. For a moment, everything inside me went silent. Completely. Deadly. Then the silence cracked open into something cold and paralyzing. OmniCorp. Victor's sworn enemy. The vultures of the industry. A conglomerate that bought small artisanal brands, stripped out their identities, replaced craftsmanship with factory sludge, and sold the corpse under the same name for twice the price. Victor loathed them with a passion so fierce it bordered on personal. He used to say, "They don't build, Maya. They consume. They devour history and spit out plastic replicas." My voice barely made it out. "They're buying Sterling Reserve?" Charlotte's voice softened for the first time. "May, what is happening over there? What are they doing?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because at that moment, the truth hit me with brutal clarity. The 20% demand wasn't a negotiation strategy. It wasn't a rookie mistake. It wasn't arrogance. It was bait. Grant and Arthur were preparing the company for sale. They needed supplier costs slashed so the books looked prettier. They needed to erase the old ways so OmniCorp could swoop in and gut the place. They needed me out of the house, so I wouldn't interfere. They needed the company stripped of its identity, so it could be sold like a used car. They didn't just want to take the company from me. They planned to destroy it. To hand it over to the very entity Victor despised from the depths of his soul. They were going to sell my husband's name, his reputation, his life's work, his legacy, behind his wife's back, behind my back. And suddenly, Grant's words from the memorial replayed in my mind in a cruel, clear whisper. "Mom, I'm the boss now." No, he wasn't the boss. He was a pawn, a puppet. And Arthur was holding the strings. Grant's greed made him blind. Arthur's greed made him dangerous. My blood turned to ice. Charlotte's voice came back into focus. "May, are you still there?" I steadied my breathing. I couldn't afford to sound shaken. "I'm here," I said calmly. "And I need one favor from you. Anything. Don't send your official reply yet. Not to my son, not to the company, not to anyone." There was a silence, then a sharp inhale. "What do you want me to do?" "Tell everyone. Tell all our old friends. Tell every partner, every artisan, every family we've worked with. Tell them OmniCorp is trying to buy Sterling Reserve. Tell them the company they gave their lives to is about to be devoured by the machine that destroys legacies." There was another silence, heavier. Then Charlotte's voice returned, low and lethal. "I understand. Completely. The gravediggers will not dine on Victor's work." We hung up. And I sat in the conservatory for a long moment, surrounded by the shattered remains of an orchid pot I'd accidentally knocked off the table. Soil scattered everywhere. Roots exposed. But the orchid itself? Still alive. Still salvageable. I rose to my feet, numb but focused. Across the invisible threads of my web, the warning began to spread. Brussels to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka to France. France to Italy. Italy to Spain. The cry moved like wildfire. Not a business alert. A call to arms. Victor Holloway's legacy is in danger. Protect it. I stepped into the garden, letting the cold air hit my face. The roses were in bloom, dark reds, deep pinks, soft ivory. The scent of them drifted around me, sweet and grounding. I picked up my pruning shears. Every snip of a dried branch felt like cutting away the last illusions about my son. Grant wasn't misguided. He wasn't confused. He wasn't acting out of grief. He was willing to sell his father's soul for a check. And Arthur? Arthur saw an opportunity to enrich himself and used my son as the key. They thought they were brilliant. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they were predators. But they had forgotten something crucial. Predators don't fear anything. They don't expect the prey to fight back. And I wasn't prey. I was a woman with 40 years of loyalty stitched into the fabric of the world's finest artisans. A woman whose web spanned continents. A woman whose husband trusted her with everything he built. A woman who would not let his name be desecrated. Grant and Arthur didn't just start a fight. They started a war. A war for honor. A war for legacy. A war for Victor's soul. And in this war, I had no intention of losing. Not to them. Not to OmniCorp. Not to anyone. This wasn't business anymore. This was personal. And the next move would be mine. The day my son chose to crown himself king was the day the universe decided to show him exactly how small he truly was. While I was in the garden trimming roses, letting the cold wind clear the haze in my chest, miles away Grant stood at the head of a sleek glass conference room in Manhattan. The kind of room designed to intimidate. Polished wood. floor-to-ceiling windows. A table long enough to seat a jury. The faint hum of a projector. It was everything Grant thought power looked like. He must have felt unstoppable. He'd spent the morning rehearsing his smile, practicing his business-casual handshake, standing in front of the mirror at the office imagining himself as the man who would close the biggest deal in Sterling Reserve history. And in his mind he wasn't just closing the deal. He was saving the company. He was proving himself. He was stepping out of his father's shadow. He thought that room was his throne. But that room was going to be his downfall. At the far end of the table sat 3 OmniCorp executives. If you took a snapshot of them and showed it to anyone, they'd think you'd copy-pasted the same man 3 times. Same suit. Same tight half-smile. Same eyes, cold, flat, hungry. Predators dressed like accountants. Grant, clueless as ever, was flattered by the attention. To him, these were titans of industry. The big leagues. Men who made the world move. And the fact that they were sitting there listening to him, gave him a high he didn't know how to control. He paced at the front of the room like a man giving a TED Talk, pointing at charts, waving his laser pointer around like a wand that proved he had authority. As you can see, gentlemen, he said with a smug flourish. After renegotiating our supplier contracts. He paused as if expecting applause already. We are projecting a 20% reduction in procurement costs this quarter alone. He clicked the remote. Another slide lit up. 20%, he repeated, savoring the number. That frees up capital, boosts our margins, and positions Sterling Reserve as your most profitable acquisition in years. The OmniCorp suits stared back at him with expressionless faces. They didn't nod. They didn't smile. They didn't even blink. But Grant took silence as admiration. He always did. He straightened his tie, stood a little taller, and continued. And most importantly, you'll gain exclusive access to the world's finest luxury ingredients. Caviar, chocolate, tea blends, you name it. Only Sterling Reserve has these contracts. He really believed he was presenting the crown jewels. What he didn't know was that the jewels had already turned to dust. His phone buzzed on the table next to him. He glanced at it. Sam Jones, warehouse manager. He frowned. This is not the time. He declined the call with a swipe of his finger, not even bothering to look. He launched into another slide. We're talking about incredible expansion potential here. Sterling Reserve is a mechanism waiting for optimization. It ran on sentiment before. Now it will run on strategy. Buzz. Sam Jones again. Grant's jaw tightened. He swiped it away with irritated force. Anyway, he continued loudly, trying to cover the interruption. As you can see, we've prepared the perfect environment for this acquisition. What my father built. His voice softened almost theatrically. We're elevating to the next phase. That was when the door burst open. Not gently. Not politely. It slammed into the wall so hard the projector flickered. Every head in the room snapped toward the door. Grant's face went the color of wet paper. Standing in the doorway was Sam Jones. A man who had never stepped foot into one of these meetings. A man who was never supposed to interrupt anything. A man who looked like he'd just watched the world catch on fire. Grease-stained jacket. Sweat on his forehead. Hands trembling. He looked wildly out of place in that glass palace. Grant hissed, mortified. What are you doing? Get out. We're in a meeting. Sam didn't even hear him. He was panting, catching his breath, clutching the doorway like his legs might give out. Mr. Holloway, he blurted. You need to hear this. Now. Grant's ears burned red. His humiliation radiated through the room like a heat wave. We are in a meeting with OmniCorp, he said through clenched teeth, forcing a smile at the executives. Do you understand? Leave. Now. Sam shook his head violently. I can't. This can't wait. The OmniCorp men turned in their seats, finally intrigued. What is this about? One of them asked coolly. Sam swallowed hard. The ships. Grant blinked. What ships? Sam's voice cracked. All of them. Silence tore through the room. What? The ships, Mr. Holloway. The shipments. The Belgian chocolate. The Sri Lankan tea. The French caviar. Every single shipment has been refused. All contracts are suspended. All cargo has been stopped. The ship's already at sea. He took a shaky breath. Turning around. Grant stared at him like he'd spoken in an alien language. Like the words couldn't possibly be English. I'm sorry, what? He whispered. The OmniCorp men exchanged glances. Not shocked. Not sympathetic. Calculating. One of them slowly, deliberately closed his laptop. Click. The sound echoed. Sam continued, voice shaking now. It's not just refusals. It's silence. Total silence. They're not answering calls. Emails. Nothing. Every supplier cut ties. All at once. Grant blinked again, his expression hollow. No. No, that's impossible. They'd never do that. They wouldn't. He stopped. Because he saw it. He saw the truth. The OmniCorp executive nearest him leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. It appears, he said in a calm, dead serious tone, that the foundation of this negotiation has dissolved. Another added, your exclusive supplier contracts were the only reason this acquisition was viable. Without them, the company's value is negligible. The third adjusted his watch. The subject is closed. They stood up. That was it. No anger. No disappointment. Just quiet, ruthless finality. Grant took a step forward, reeling. Gentlemen, please, if you let me explain. There is nothing to explain, Mr. Holloway, the suit closest to him said. With your suppliers gone, there is no sterling reserve for us to acquire. Then, without a glance back, the three men left the room. Grant remained standing there, frozen in place, as the door shut behind them with a dull, final thud. He looked like a man struck by a slow-moving bullet. He stood stiff, pale, silent. His empire had collapsed in front of strangers. His pride had been stripped. His confidence shattered. And worst of all, he knew he'd done it to himself. He looked at the slides still glowing on the projector screen behind him. Projected profit growth. 20% savings. Value optimization. Everything he believed made him smart, superior, ready to lead. Now it looked like a joke. A cruel, childish joke. He slowly sat down, elbows on the table, hands gripping his hair. Sam stood near the door, eyes filled with pity. He'd been with Victor for 30 years. This moment hurt him too. But he had to speak. Mr. Holloway, what do we do now? Grant didn't answer. Because there was no answer. Not for him. Not for Arthur. Not for the mess they'd created. There was only one place left for him to go. One person to blame. One person he believed had the power to fix everything. He stormed out of that building with adrenaline and shame burning through his bloodstream. And he drove. Fast. Reckless. Blinded by panic. Toward me. Toward the house. Toward the garden where I stood, trimming roses, sensing the shift in the air long before I heard the distant squeal of tires. The war had officially reached my doorstep. And I was ready. Grant arrived like a storm, slamming the front door with so much force it rattled the windows. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the lawn, and I could see the raw edge of panic on his face before he even stepped onto the porch. He stormed up the steps, his tailored jacket flaring behind him like a cape, and his polished shoes scuffing the marble. Every step shouted, Asterisk, I'm in charge now. I'll fix this. I'll reclaim what's mine. Asterisk, but the words weren't steady. They trembled just enough to betray him. When he reached the terrace, I was there waiting, hands clean from the soil, a simple linen blouse tucked neatly into high-waist trousers. No frills. No theatrics. Just calm. Controlled. Unshakable. He stopped, glaring at me, trying to summon the authority he imagined he'd earned. His voice came out too loud, strained, cracking at the edges. Mom. What the hell is going on? Why did Charlotte cancel the shipments? Why is OmniCorp backing off? This isn't supposed to happen. I studied him quietly. There was anger, yes, but also shock, and beneath that, panic. The same panic that had never shown up in his high school exams, his college presentations, or even his first minor corporate victory. Panic made a boy out of a man. Sit down, Grant, I said, voice steady, almost soft. He blinked. He didn't sit. He didn't know how. Instead, he stepped closer, hands flailing just slightly. This is ridiculous. They're supposed to listen to me. I'm the CEO now. I'm running this company. Dad made me the boss. I let him go on. His mouth was moving, but his words had lost their power. My calmness wasn't intimidating yet, it was revealing. Grant, I said finally, you don't run this company. You've been handed a name and a set of buildings and a few spreadsheets. That's all you've got. And you think shouting and bullying will make people follow you? That's not how business works. That's not how relationships work. That's not how Victor built this company. His face went red. Rage flared. He opened his mouth, ready to argue, but I wasn't finished. I took a slow step forward, closer, careful, not threatening but deliberate. Do you even know why Charlotte called me this morning? Or why Sundaram hasn't replied? Or why Lauren is holding every shipment in France? Grant blinked. He stammered. They're loyal, I said. Not to you. Not to me. To your father. To the man you think you can replace with your spreadsheets and your high-pitched TED Talk energy. Loyalty isn't bought. It's earned. And you've earned nothing. For a second I saw him falter. A flash of something that reminded me he was my son. A boy who had once wanted my approval for everything from a failing math test to a scraped knee. But that boy was buried under arrogance and entitlement. And for him to reach it now would take more than a slap or a lecture. Mom, this isn't fair, he shouted, voice cracking. I'm trying to save the company. I'm doing what has to be done. And in doing so, I said, tilting my head slightly, you've shown everyone exactly who you are. And they've seen right through you. Every supplier. Every friend. Every person who ever trusted Victor and, by extension, trusted me. You've destroyed your credibility in a single day. And let me tell you something, Grant. I let the words hang. He swallowed hard. He knew what was coming. Everything you thought you could control. I continued. Everything you think you own isn't yours. Not yet. And if you keep moving the way you are, slicing, slashing, screaming, you will lose it all. Because business isn't about power. It's about trust. And you just burned every bridge in the world. Grant's hands trembled at his sides. He looked around, trying to find support, but the garden was empty. Just the roses. The sunlight glinting off the leaves. And me. Calm, unwavering, like a force of nature he had no chance to resist. He tried to argue again. I can fix this. I just need. No, I interrupted softly, cutting him off without a hint of aggression. You don't get to fix this. You only get to watch. You'll watch because it's time you learn that nothing in this world comes from entitlement. Not respect. Not loyalty. Not power. You earn that. Or you fail. He clenched his fists. His jaw. His entire body screamed resistance. But resistance without knowledge is meaningless. And he didn't know what I knew. You don't know, I said quietly. You have no idea what's happening behind the scenes right now. The shipments you tried to manipulate? They're being held. By friends. People who've known Victor and me for decades. They won't budge for you. OmniCorp? They're watching, but they can't touch us yet. Because we still have the real leverage. The loyalty. And that leverage is mine. His shoulders slumped, almost imperceptibly. But it was there. A crack. You think calling me boss means I can destroy a lifetime of relationships? That people will bend for your spreadsheets and numbers? That's not how this works. Never has been. Never will be. And now, you're about to learn the hard way what loyalty really costs. He finally spoke, but his voice was lower. Weaker. Trembling just enough that I could see the fear creeping in. What are you going to do? I smiled, the faintest, most subtle curve of my lips. What I always do, I said. I protect what's mine. I fix what's broken. And I make sure anyone trying to destroy it pays the price. I stepped back toward the house, brushing a fallen leaf from my sleeve. The roses caught the last golden rays of sunlight, sharp and fragrant. Grant stood frozen, like a kid caught in the middle of a lesson he refused to take. His chest heaved. His eyes darted to the horizon, searching for allies, escape answers. There were none. Then I turned fully, looked him in the eye, and delivered the final words of the encounter. You wanted to be king today. But today, you learned that the crown doesn't exist until it's earned. And you're not even close. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He tried to speak, but no words came. Not because he didn't want to argue, but because the truth had silenced him. That day, Grant realized something he had never understood. The world Victor built was bigger than him, stronger than him, and it was protected by someone far smarter than a son blinded by entitlement. I walked into the house, my heels clicking on the marble, leaving him standing there with nothing but his ego and the weight of his mistakes. Inside, I closed the study door behind me, sat at Victor's desk, opened the notebook, and began the first formal moves of my counterattack. Reaching out to key allies, reviewing supplier contracts, noting every tiny point of leverage I could use. The chessboard was set. Grant had made his first move recklessly. He thought he had checkmate. I was about to show him that I had been playing 3 moves ahead all along. The morning after Grant's humiliation, the house was quiet in a way that felt almost sacred. The kind of quiet that signals a storm has passed, but another is gathering on the horizon. I moved through the rooms methodically, my mind racing, but my body calm. I wasn't reacting, I was planning. Victor's study was the command center. His books, ledgers, and contracts weren't just relics of the past. They were maps to every relationship, every promise, every ounce of loyalty he had built over decades. And now I had the freedom to use them. I opened my notebook and started dialing the numbers I had compiled over 40 years. The first call went to Charlotte. Brussels had already cooled from yesterday's anger, but the fire in her voice returned when I mentioned OmniCorp. Maya, she said sharply, we're ready. All shipments remain on hold. No contracts will move without our approval. Good, I said. I need you to do more than just hold. I need you to actively protect the company. Make it clear OmniCorp cannot acquire anything without negotiating with me directly. Let them understand that Sterling Reserve is not theirs to take. Charlotte chuckled softly. I like the way you think. Consider it done. Next was Sundaram in Sri Lanka. His calm voice carried a weight that made anyone listening lean in. Madam Holloway, I have already instructed my team. No tea leaves will leave our warehouses without my explicit permission. We remember Victor. We will honor him. And I will honor you. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. That's all I need, Mr. Sundaram. Thank you. Lauren in France was next. I anticipated his initial skepticism. French businessmen often pride themselves on strategy, not emotion. But I didn't need emotion. I needed resolve. Monsieur Lauren, I said. Sterling Reserve's legacy is at stake. OmniCorp is attempting to buy the company without your consent. I need your cooperation to make sure that never happens. There was a long pause, then a soft, measured response. Madam Holloway, for Victor, for you, we will halt all shipments. Every agreement will be frozen until you say otherwise. This will send a clear message. With that, my web was complete. Every thread reinforced, every ally activated. Grant and Arthur didn't know it yet, but the company was already unassailable. Meanwhile, Grant was spiraling. His confidence from the previous day had vanished, replaced with desperation. Every call he made to suppliers was ignored. Emails went unanswered. Even Arthur seemed nervous now, realizing that his carefully crafted plan was crumbling faster than he could adjust. Grant finally drove back to the estate that evening, furious and exhausted. I was in the garden again, pruning the roses, letting the motion calm me. He stormed up, slamming the door behind him, eyes blazing. Mom, what is happening? Why won't anyone answer me? I didn't look up. I continued my work with slow, deliberate movements, letting him fume. They know, I said softly. They know exactly what you're trying to do. And they won't let it happen. He froze. Who told them? Me, I said calmly. I made a few calls. Not threats. Not bribes. Just reminded them of the respect and trust we've built over decades. Loyalty isn't about fear, Grant. It's about honor. Something you've never understood. His face twisted in disbelief. You can't just, this isn't fair. I'm the boss. Not yet, I said, finally looking up at him. My eyes were steady, unwavering. And you won't be if you keep moving the way you are. You think you can buy people, manipulate contracts, and everything will bend to your will? You're learning the hard way that real power doesn't come from money. It comes from trust. And you just burned every ounce of it yesterday. He stepped closer, anger and panic flaring simultaneously. I can fix this. I can fix it, I just need. No, I interrupted, voice firm but controlled. You can't fix it, Grant. You can only watch. And if you keep trying to force things, you'll break the company before you even understand what it means to run it. His jaw clenched. He opened his mouth to argue again but paused. There was hesitation there, a crack in his armor. He could feel, even if he didn't fully understand, that the ground beneath him was no longer solid. I continued, taking a slow step closer. You're not thinking strategically. You're reacting. You see a problem, and you try to solve it with anger and fear. That's not leadership. That's panic. And panic doesn't build empires. It destroys them. He staggered back slightly, frustration and confusion battling in his eyes. He had no idea what was coming next, what I had prepared. He didn't know that every move he had made was anticipated. Every shipment he tried to manipulate was already under my control. Every supplier that ignored him had already pledged their loyalty to me. And the real test was yet to come. I walked past him, through the hallway, and into Victor's study. He followed reluctantly, as if he were drawn by curiosity and fear simultaneously. I sat at the desk, opened the ledger, and began outlining my first formal countermeasures. Reviewing every contract, every shipment schedule, every communication with suppliers. I mapped it all out, connecting the dots. Grant hovered behind me, desperate, trying to peek at the documents, trying to understand the complexity of what I was doing. But it was too late. He had already lost the initiative. You see, Grant, I said without looking up, this isn't about you. It's about the company, the people, the legacy Victor built. And you don't get to destroy that legacy because you want to prove something. Not to me. Not to anyone. His face reddened. So what? I just stand here and watch. Exactly, I said calmly. You've already shown how reckless you are. Now you'll watch and learn. That's how leadership works. You earn it or you lose it. For the first time, I saw the boy behind the man. The one who had once asked for my approval for everything. The one who thought he could shortcut his way to power. He was still there, buried under the arrogance, and I knew I could reach him eventually. But that wasn't the goal right now. The goal was control. And I had it. By the end of that evening, the first threads of my counterattack had been set in motion. Charlotte had halted all shipments to Brussels. Sundaram had frozen the tea supply lines. Lauren had stopped caviar deliveries. And OmniCorp's executives had been left empty-handed, unable to secure a single asset. Grant realized, finally, that he was no longer in command. And Arthur, realizing his carefully laid plans were unraveling, began to hesitate, unsure whether he should push forward or retreat. The first wave of my strategy had worked. But this was only the beginning. I leaned back in Victor's chair, fingers intertwined, feeling the calm of the storm I had orchestrated. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Outside, the roses swayed gently in the night breeze. I whispered to myself, almost as a vow, almost as a prayer. You underestimated me. You underestimated what loyalty, respect, and decades of work can do. You will learn, Grant. You will learn, and you will pay attention this time. The war had officially begun. And I was ready. The night was calm, but inside the estate, a quiet storm was brewing. The war for sterling reserve had shifted, and I could feel it in every corner of the house, every creaking floorboard, and every ticking clock in Victor's study. The chessboard had been set, and now the pieces were moving, but only the ones I controlled. Grant and Arthur had spent the day running through scenarios, panicked phone calls, desperate emails, and failed attempts to rally any supplier or partner to their side. Each message bounced back unanswered. Each call went straight to voicemail. Each warehouse and shipping line refused to budge. They were drowning in the consequences of their own arrogance, and I watched from the sidelines, calm and unshaken. I called Charlotte again. Her voice was soft, warm, but resolute. Maya, everything is under control. They are listening. OmniCorp is asking questions, but they have no leverage. Your strategy is flawless. I smiled faintly. Good. Keep it that way. Any change, you call me immediately. No diles. She hesitated, then added, Maya, be careful. They are desperate, And desperation makes people dangerous. I know, I said. But so am I. Next was Sundaram. He confirmed the tea shipments were frozen, and all future contracts were on hold. He had already sent messages to his regional managers, warning them not to comply with any sudden requests, no matter who called. Loyalty, once earned, had now become an unbreakable chain. Lauren's French caviar family had gone even further. They were ready to cut off all sales to Sterling Reserve if anyone other than me attempted to make a deal. Every shipment, every delivery, every payment was now fully under my control. The first phase of my plan was complete. The suppliers, the legacy partners, the lifeblood of the company, untouched by Grant's hand, firmly loyal to me. And then I turned to the second phase, Grant and Arthur. They didn't know I had compiled every conversation, every contract, every email. They had no idea that the moment they thought they were taking over, I had already documented every misstep, every rash demand, every attempt to manipulate the company for personal gain. Grant had no allies left. Arthur had no backup. Both were isolated and vulnerable, like predators caught in a trap they didn't see until it was too late. I let them flail for a while. Let their panic grow. Let them hit walls they couldn't break through. Let them feel the consequences of their recklessness. And then, when they were sufficiently unsettled, I made my move. A carefully worded letter appeared on their desks the next morning. Not confrontational, not emotional. Just facts. Evidence. Documentation of every failed attempt, every supplier refusal, every misstep. The tone was calm, professional, and precise. By the time they finished reading, the color had drained from their faces. They understood immediately. The narrative they thought they controlled had been rewritten. The game they thought they were winning had been lost before they even realized it started. I didn't stop there. I followed up with a series of strategic calls and meetings. I personally reached out to every key partner and supplier. Each conversation was deliberate, controlled, and clear. I reminded them who had built the company, who had earned their loyalty, and who would ensure their interests were protected. The reactions were immediate. Charlotte confirmed that OmniCorp had made inquiries, but received only polite refusals and firm boundaries. Sundaram's team reported no disruptions, only confirmation of ongoing loyalty. Lauren's caviar family added extra security measures, ensuring no shipments could be diverted without explicit approval. I was no longer defending, I was consolidating. Meanwhile, Grant and Arthur were becoming increasingly desperate. Their calls went unanswered. Their emails ignored. They couldn't buy cooperation. They couldn't command respect. And they couldn't understand why. I let them stew in their confusion. Let them feel powerless. Let them experience the consequences of underestimating me. And then I applied the final pressure. I called Grant into Victor's study. Calmly. Methodically. He arrived eyes wide, mouth set in a grim line. I gestured for him to sit. He hesitated, then complied. "Mom, I don't understand," he said. How? How did you get all of this? How did you stop them?" I leaned back, hands resting on the desk. Calm, composed, authoritative. Because I always knew what you would do. I knew how you'd react. I knew your weaknesses, and I knew the strengths of those who've always been loyal. You've spent your life trying to prove yourself, Grant, but you've forgotten one thing. This company isn't about proving yourself. It's about honoring what came before you. And that's why you failed. He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand. Listen carefully. You are still my son and I love you. But your role in this company is not to dictate, not to dominate, not to destroy. Your role is to learn, to respect, to understand that real power comes from loyalty, from trust, from relationships that can't be bought or forced. I paused, letting the words sink in. His shoulders slumped slightly, though the arrogance hadn't fully vanished. It never would. But the fear and respect were beginning to take root. You've made mistakes, I continued. Big mistakes. Mistakes that could have cost this company everything. And you've learned a very important lesson. Arrogance and entitlement do not equal leadership. He looked down at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. That in itself was progress. It wasn't about punishment. It was about strategy. About teaching him that leadership required more than authority. It required vision, patience, and respect for the people who make a company what it is. That week marked the turning point. The war had been won, not with force, but with intelligence, foresight, and the loyalty that Victor and I had cultivated over decades. Grant and Arthur were no longer threats. They were contained variables, moving exactly where I allowed them to move. Every supplier, every partner, every piece of the company answered to me. I had secured sterling reserve. Not with anger, not with intimidation, but with strategy. And in doing so, I had proven a truth that would echo far beyond the walls of the estate. True power belongs to those who understand the full scope of loyalty, trust, and legacy. The storm had passed. The empire was safe. And I, Maya Holloway, had risen to claim my rightful place at its center. The estate was quiet that morning, the kind of silence that felt almost sacred. The roses were in full bloom, their fragrance heavy in the air, the sunlight glinting off the petals like liquid gold. Everything was as it should be. The company was safe. The suppliers were loyal. And Grant, for the first time, understood exactly what he had underestimated. He stood at the edge of the garden, hands in his pockets, staring at the rows of roses with an expression I had rarely seen. Humility mixed with fear. The arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by the kind of cautious awareness that comes only when someone realizes the full weight of their mistakes. I approached him slowly, deliberately, giving him the time and space to absorb the truth. "Grant," I said softly, "do you understand now why I've always told you that leadership isn't about titles? It's not about orders or control. It's about loyalty, trust, and respect. Everything you thought gave you power meant nothing without those things." He nodded slowly. Words failed him. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again. Finally, he exhaled sharply, like letting go of a burden he had carried too long. "Yes, Mom," he said quietly. I understand." Good, I thought. That was all I needed. Understanding was the first step toward change, and in that garden, surrounded by the legacy Victor and I had built, the lesson had been learned. I turned to the estate, to the house, to the company that had been threatened, and I felt a rare, deep satisfaction. Not pride, exactly. Not the shallow kind, but a calm, steady assurance that comes from knowing the right decisions had been made at the right time. The first phase of victory was complete. Sterling reserve was protected. Every supplier, every partner, every shipment was under control. OmniCorp's ambitions had been neutralized. And Grant, the boy who thought he could claim his father's empire overnight, had been humbled. But this was only the calm before the next steps. Lessons learned had to be reinforced. Control had to be absolute. And the final pieces of my strategy had to be put into place. I walked back inside, past the study where Victor's desk stood like a silent witness to the events of the past week. I opened the ledger, reviewing contracts one last time, making minor adjustments, final confirmations. Each call, each instruction, each subtle move reinforced the message. Sterling reserve was untouchable. Not because of fear, not because of threats, but because of loyalty, precision, and foresight. Grant watched silent, absorbing every detail. He didn't speak. He didn't argue. He simply followed the rhythm, learning what I had always known. Real leadership is not a position. It is a responsibility. By the end of the day, everything was secure. Suppliers confirmed. Shipments cleared. Partners reassured. And OmniCorp, for the time being, had no leverage, no pathway, no access. Grant finally spoke, voice low and careful. I see now. I've been reckless. I thought I could take shortcuts, make changes, and it would all work out. I was wrong. I nodded. Yes, you were. But now you know. And if you remember this lesson, you might actually learn what it means to lead. He bowed his head slightly, an unspoken acknowledgement of defeat, but also a spark of understanding. I knew then that the battle had been won, not with anger, not with force, but with strategy, patience, and loyalty. The company was safe, the legacy intact, and the lesson had been delivered in full measure. As I looked out over the garden, the sun dipping lower on the horizon, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in. Sterling reserve would continue. Victor's vision would endure. And I had proven, in every subtle, deliberate way, that the guardian of this legacy would always prevail. The storm had passed. The empire was secure. And I, Maya Holloway, had risen to claim not just victory, but the lasting respect and love. The following days were a delicate balance of observation and subtle guidance. Grant and Arthur, chastened but still present, moved through the company like shadows of their former arrogance. Every step they took was measured, hesitant, as if the ground itself had shifted beneath them. And it had because it had. I observed quietly, letting them navigate the consequences of their own actions. There was no need for confrontation anymore. The lesson had been internalized. Every supplier had been reminded, every partner reassured, every shipment secured. Sterling Reserve's foundation was unshakable. Arthur, realizing the futility of his maneuvers, finally approached me in Victor's study. His usual confident swagger was gone, replaced by a careful, almost pleading posture. Maya, he began, voice low, careful. We didn't understand. We thought we could manage the transition, maximize profits, make the company more efficient. But we see now we were wrong. I didn't reply immediately. I allowed the words to linger, the silence stretching, heavy with meaning. They needed to feel the weight of their mistakes. Finally I spoke. Yes. You were wrong. And you've seen what happens when decisions are made without respect, without understanding, without consideration for the people who built this company. Sterling Reserve is not just a business. It is a legacy. And legacy cannot be taken lightly. Arthur nodded, swallowing hard. We understand. Completely. Whatever you decide, we'll follow your lead. I leaned back in Victor's chair, folding my hands over the desk. Good. Because from now on, all decisions regarding this company, all strategic moves, all partnerships and shipments, will go through me. You will assist, yes, but you will not dictate. Not again. Grant stood silently in the corner, eyes fixed on the desk, the weight of his earlier arrogance replaced by cautious respect. He had learned the hard way that leadership is not granted by title, nor inherited by birth. It is earned through judgment, loyalty, and foresight. You both need to understand, I continued, voice calm but firm, that the world is watching. Suppliers, partners, competitors, they all pay attention. Sterling Reserve's reputation, the legacy your father built, is far more valuable than short-term profits or hasty decisions. From this moment forward, every action, every decision, every move will reflect that understanding. Do I make myself clear? Yes, they said together, almost in unison. I nodded, satisfied. The first phase of containment and correction was complete. Sterling Reserve was secure. My authority was undisputed. And the company's legacy would endure. The next days were spent reinforcing stability. I personally oversaw communications with every supplier, confirming loyalty and trust. Charlotte reported back from Brussels that OmniCorp had paused all inquiries, realizing that they could not manipulate the network of relationships I had solidified. Syndrome confirmed that every tea shipment remained frozen until my approval. Lauren's Caviar family had doubled security measures. The entire supply chain, every critical connection, was now fully under my control. Grant observed these interactions silently, absorbing lessons through action rather than admonition. The boy who had thought shouting and authority could bend the world had become a man who understood the value of patience, foresight, and careful negotiation. I scheduled a final call with Charlotte, a moment of quiet triumph. Maya, she said warmly. Everything is exactly as it should be. Sterling Reserve is secure. You've handled this brilliantly. Yes, I said, taking a deep breath. And Grant has learned the lesson he needed to. That's just as important as securing the company itself. The sun was setting outside, casting long, golden shadows across the estate. The roses swayed gently in the evening breeze, their petals reflecting the light like shards of molten gold. I walked through the garden, the familiar scent grounding me, a reminder of the stability I had restored. Every corner of the estate, every contract, every supplier relationship, now reflected the new order. Loyalty, respect, and legacy above all. Sterling Reserve had weathered the storm, stronger than ever. And I had proven, through strategy, calm authority, and unshakable resolve, that no challenge, Neither OmniCorp nor greed-driven children, nor ambitious partners, could undermine the foundation Victor and I had built. Grant finally spoke, quietly, almost reverently. "Mom, thank you. I understand now. I see what leadership really means. I see how much you had to do to protect everything." I looked at him, seeing the change. "Not complete yet, but enough. You're learning," I said simply. And that's all I ever wanted. The house settled into a peaceful rhythm. The storm had passed. Sterling Reserve's future was secure. And I, Maya Holloway, had restored not just the company, but the respect, loyalty, and honor that made it what it was. The empire was safe. The legacy endured. And the lesson had been delivered in full measure. The morning sun spilled across the estate in soft golden light, illuminating the roses and the meticulously maintained gardens. There was a calmness now that had been absent for weeks. A calm that spoke not of inaction, but of triumph, of control, of lessons learned and authority established. I walked slowly through the corridors of Sterling Reserve, past the rooms where Victor's legacy lived, and past the offices where Grant and Arthur now worked in cautious silence. Their steps were measured, deliberate, their arrogance tempered by the realization that they were no longer the ones in command. It was a quiet power, the kind that didn't need to shout to be felt. Sterling Reserve was alive, vibrant and secure, and I was at its center. Not as a shadow of my husband, not as a caretaker, but as the leader it required. Grant entered Victor's study, hesitating at the threshold. He had spent the past week absorbing lessons, observing my strategy, understanding the depth of relationships that had kept the company intact. He no longer approached with brash confidence. He approached with respect, with a recognition of authority earned through action, not inheritance. "Mom," he said quietly, "I want to apologize. I didn't understand. I thought I could take shortcuts, make quick changes, and it would all work out. I see now that I was wrong." I studied him for a moment. There was no need for theatrics. No need for grand gestures. The acknowledgement was enough. "Grant," I said softly, "this company, this legacy, isn't about you proving yourself overnight. It's about understanding the people, the relationships, the decisions that build trust and loyalty. You've learned your lesson. Don't forget it." He nodded, humility mixed with a spark of determination. He was beginning to grasp what real leadership required. Arthur appeared next, more subdued than usual. "Maya," he said carefully, "I realize now that we underestimated everything. The suppliers, the partners, the loyalty, and you. From this point forward, we'll follow your guidance. We understand that Sterling Reserve is in capable hands." I inclined my head. Good. Because from now on, all decisions, strategic, financial, operational, will be coordinated through me. Your roles are to assist, to learn, and to respect the chain of authority. Sterling Reserve is more than a name, more than a company. It's a legacy, and it will be protected. The realization dawned on them fully. The power they sought through titles and entitlement was meaningless without understanding, without strategy, without loyalty. I turned my attention back to the estate itself, to the suppliers, the shipments, the partners who had stood with us through this crisis. Charlotte confirmed once again that OmniCorp had paused all inquiries, unable to leverage a single contract. Sundram and Lauren had reinforced their commitments, ensuring that every shipment, every partnership, every communication went through channels I controlled. Sterling Reserve had been tested, and it had survived. Stronger, more resilient, and better prepared for future challenges. I walked through the garden, inhaling the familiar fragrance of roses, feeling the calm of victory settle in my chest. The sun cast long shadows, and the estate was bathed in a soft glow that reflected the stability now firmly in place. Grant approached, more confident now but tempered by the lessons of the past days. "Mom, thank you. I see now how much work, how much planning, and how much understanding it takes to run this company. I will do better." I nodded. "You will. And that's all I ask. Learn. Observe. Respect. Sterling Reserve will endure, because of those who understand that leadership is earned, not inherited."
The house and gardens exhaled with quiet energy, the kind that comes from order restored and lessons learned. The suppliers, the partners, the employees, all were aligned, loyal, and prepared. OmniCorp had been held at bay, unable to penetrate the network of relationships, trust, and authority that had been reinforced under my guidance. I took a moment at Victor's desk, opening the ledger and reviewing the plans for the coming months. Adjustments, yes, but nothing that threatened the stability we had restored. Every decision was deliberate, every action precise. Sterling Reserve would continue to grow, protected not just by contracts and agreements, but by strategy, loyalty, and foresight. As I closed the ledger, I allowed myself a moment of quiet reflection. The storm had passed, but vigilance would remain. Leadership was not static. It required constant attention, careful planning, and unwavering awareness. The empire was secure, but it would require ongoing stewardship to remain untouchable. Grant and Arthur had accepted their roles. They had learned the consequences of haste, arrogance, and disregard for relationships. They would now act as allies, assistants, and students, observing and learning from the authority they had once challenged. I looked out the window at the garden, at the roses standing tall and resilient in the morning light. Sterling Reserve was safe. The legacy endured. And I, Maya Holloway, had proven that true leadership is earned, maintained, and respected. Not demanded, not inherited, but lived and demonstrated through every choice, every action, every decision. The final lesson had been delivered. The company was protected. And the empire, built on decades of vision, loyalty, and strategy, would continue to thrive under vigilant, deliberate stewardship. And so, as the sun rose higher, casting its light across the estate, Sterling Reserve stood secure. The threats had been neutralized, the lessons learned, and the future safeguarded. Leadership had been asserted, authority restored, and legacy preserved. Maya Holloway had not just protected an empire. She had claimed it, guided it, and ensured that its foundation would remain unshakable for generations to come. The battle was over. The war had been won. And the company's story, its legacy, would continue, stronger than ever. If you're enjoying Maya's strategy and power moves, go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling us which move surprised you the most.